Are you still compromising your carnivore diet with cheats and treats? Well, I want you to know I've been there. So let's talk our way through this. What's shaking bacon? My name is Bruno Panucci. I've been doing this carnivore diet consistently for over a year and a half now, and I've been doing it intermittently for a few years before that, since 2018. Now, there was a variety of reasons why I wasn't sticking to it. Now, the two big ones I would say were trying to deal with my gout and also carbohydrate and sugar addiction. Now, when you're dealing with carbohydrate and sugar addiction, there's all sorts of reasons why you slide back. Now, you can have lots of different triggers, and lots of them can be emotional. And I've always been an emotional eater. But now when I emotionally eat, I stick with carnivore. So I might go to things like cheese or bacon or things like that, maybe some cold cuts. Now, it's a bit of an outlet, but it's still well within my boundaries and borders of the limitations I've given myself eating an all meat diet. So it's pretty easy for me. Like, I'm at this point where I'm old hat with it and I'm not worried about going off of this way of eating. I would sooner starve than have something I'm not allowed to have, because I know just a lick, taste, or bite of any of those things is the equivalent of an ex-smoker who has one drag of a cigarette. Not many ex-smokers can have one drag of a cigarette and not have the whole thing or not go back to their old addiction. That's just the way I am. I learned to accept it. It took a long time of compromising and trying to negotiate with myself that wasn't the case and I could manage it. I tried for years to manage it, and I had to learn I was an abstainer, not a moderator. Now, if you are being honest with yourself, which would you say you are? If you're a moderator, this probably isn't a video that's important to you. If you can have 3 chips and not think about it for the rest of the night, hey, you're the man. Go for it. But I think lots of people out there are abstainers, and they have to sort of fall off the wagon every time they have something, and it's a challenge to get back on the wagon. So what are some reasons why people do this? Often it comes down to some type of emotion. It's not only the physical setup that we set ourselves up for, say, forgetting some food at home or not having food available for us, or being at someone's house. Those are reasons enough, but there's bigger reasons behind those, and it comes down to the addiction and the emotions behind us. But we allow ourselves into thinking that little bite is okay just this one time. You give into that urge, and that urge is often the way you slip back, and we want to prevent that from happening. I did that for a long time. I hope I can convince you to shorten that cycle. It took a really stressful moment in life for me to stop and binge eat for 4 months straight before I sort of had that wake-up call, almost like an epiphany, and I realized, oh man, like, this has me. It has a hold on me. So let's talk about some of the reasons people might get to that point where they put that food in their mouths. I know one of my triggers was reward. So I went a year without carbs back in the October 2013 to October 2014, a whole year, and I had no problems with it. It was tough in the beginning, but very quickly I adapted to it, and for the next few months, the addiction went away, and probably took about 3 months. And I eventually had some junk food. And when I had some junk food, I remember thinking, wow, I didn't want any more. I had a small child-sized portion of ice cream and I was fine with it. And I wasn't craving more afterwards. I was satisfied with the amount I had. And I convinced myself I could do that once a week. And I was doing fine with that. And then I went to twice a week and I was fine with that. And then I went to 3 times a week. And within that first week of 3 times a week, I fell off the wagon. So I learned the hard way. I can't reward myself. It's a slippery slope. At best, I could reward myself once a week. But I've already been down that road. That road is full of gravel, trees that have fallen over, and boulders and potholes. I don't want to go down that road again. It's not worth it for me. It's not. I would sooner starve. So for me, rewarding myself with junk food or food that's not on a carnivore approved way of eating, I just can't do it because I fall back into that addictive behavior. Before I started treating myself with all this junk food, very judicious small amounts, I had lost 180 pounds in that year. That's a lot. And I ended up putting on about 130 of that. So it really wasn't worth it. And after that, I had a heart attack. I went through some big life changes. And over the next few years after that, I went through quite a bit actually. And I was doing emotional eating. So it was hard to stick to it. Now, between that and again, the gout and the sugar addiction, I was using those excuses to let myself go back to a bad way of eating. I almost said crappy way of eating. So basically what I learned was reward is not the way for me to go. I did not reward myself with food that's off this way of eating. I found new foods to reward myself with. Boredom is one thing I used to do. So back when I was married, we used to sometimes go off our diets for a day or a weekend, usually a long weekend. So whenever there's a long weekend, it was an unspoken thing. We both just accepted that we were going to have pizza and Chinese food and Indian food and chips and chocolate bars and ice cream and cake, all these things in one week. We'd go to Tim Hortons and grab all sorts of junk. We'd eat out just for the whole weekend. And it was a waste of time, money, and it was always a setback. We did that out of boredom. It became a routine. We had a down weekend and we both just needed to relax, recharge our batteries. But it's not good if you're recharging yourself with the wrong type of fuel. You're causing more damage. And it takes a long time to get over how bad you feel by the end of that weekend. Just physically, it takes a few weeks to bounce back from that, let alone the fact that you've sort of destroyed your progress being on a zero carb diet. Trust me when I say, in my opinion, it's not worth it to give yourself that little treat daily or weekly. It's not worth it if you can have, say, your little bit of ice cream at the end of every day, or I did really good today and I'm having a glass of wine, or I'm having any type of carbohydrate. It's not worth it. You're keeping the sugar and carbohydrate addiction going longer. Now, if you don't have that addiction, maybe this doesn't apply to you. Boredom can get the best of you. Before you know it, you've let yourself slip down that slope. So you got to do something different when you have downtime, when you're just bored and you're thinking, I just want to eat something. And eventually a little devil in your shoulder appears and says, let's order pizza. And then next thing you know, you're off the wagon, right? You're fighting these urges. And if you don't change your mindset, you're going to cost yourself time, money, and possibly all the progress you've made over the last few months, weeks, or years. For entertainment. So say you go to a movie, say you have friends over and you're watching a movie, say you're going to a barbecue and food is part of the entertainment, right? It's part of the vibe. If you know you always have the urge to get junk food when you go to a theater, maybe it's not a good idea to go to a theater for a while. Maybe it's worthwhile to just stay at home, break those habits, or go out of your way to force a new habit. So when you do go to the theater, bring food there you're allowed to have. Bring a bag of bacon. Like, oh man, wouldn't that be great to munch on some bacon? I like to chew on ice. It keeps my teeth nice and white. Bling. So for the first while, it might be a smart idea to just avoid those forms of entertainment. But after maybe a couple weeks or maybe a couple months, most people, for me, I know would be at least a couple months, I would have to bring a substitute food. I'd have to bring something so that I know I could eat something healthy that I'm allowed to have on this carnivore diet to the theater or at home if I had company over or I went to somebody's house. I'm Italian. I'm all about food and entertainment and family. They all go together. Like I had a bit of a challenge overcoming that, but I eventually did it. So recognize entertainment areas maybe is something that you got to watch out for. And that goes along with celebrations, right? So celebrations, maybe it's someone's baptism or birth or a celebration of life after somebody passed away. You go to lots of these events or barbecues or work events, and there's lots of junk food and you're going to be around it and you just know you're going to cheat. So for some people, it's stressful to go to those events to begin with, but those celebrations can be really difficult because they're always triggers. Sometimes there's often different cakes or ice cream or alcohol. It's best to avoid those situations till you've gotten old hat, till you've gotten those cravings completely out of your system. And if you are under the 3-month mark, maybe you're not there yet. I've heard a carnivore is still slipping back within a year, 2 or 3 years of being carnivore. Now, I like to think that won't be me, but I'm telling you, in the first 3 months, I don't think it's a good idea that you give into any of these situations. I think you take these situations very seriously and very cautiously because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're going to cheat. Now, we save the biggest one for last, stress. Stress is one of the biggest triggers people have. It could be family problems. It could be problems at work. It could be problems with friends. It could be someone's health. It could be your health. It could be problems in your own home. I don't think anyone is above stress. Stress comes to all of us. I liken stress to water pouring into a bathtub. Now, there's a tap with water going in, and that's the stress. There's a drain for water to leave. That's the outlet. We all manage stress, and we can do a pretty good job with it. But sometimes in life, people add extra hoses to that bathtub, and that bathtub can fill up with more and more stress. And obviously in this situation, water is the stress, right? And we need to add more drains to compensate. Now, we need outlets. And so if we have 2 or 3 hoses extra pouring into that bathtub at once, along with the tap being turned on full blast, that bathtub is going to overflow. And when we overflow, that's when we go to the food we're not allowed to have. I always recommend finding hobbies, and more importantly, doing those hobbies. I personally suck with being consistent with my hobbies. I have to make a priority and a goal, and I mean a goal I write down every month to stick with some of my hobbies. As much as I love doing them, I put myself in a negative mindset years ago that I won't do that hobby until I get this responsibility done. And the problem was, I didn't get that responsibility done for a really long time because it was a big mountain to climb. And I just got out of the habit of doing my hobbies. I stopped rewarding myself and fueling myself so that I could keep up with my daily activities. So I allowed that bathtub to stay full all the time. And that was my fault. It was a weird negative consequence I gave myself. So when it comes to hobbies, I always recommend something that's mentally stimulating, something that's physically stimulating, and something that's artistically stimulating. I'll give some examples for each. A physically stimulating hobby, you can put on any YouTube video and learn exercises, stretches, boxing, martial arts. You can do shadow boxing. There's a lot you can do at home. And a good way to get out of the mindset of an addiction when you're feeling a strong craving is to get on the floor and do a bunch of push-ups or sit-ups or a bunch of squats or jump squats. Most anyone can do these things. If you can sit down, you can squat. So I don't want to hear someone say, oh, I can't squat, I got bad knees. You squat every time you sit down. So that's no excuse. You just have to do a modified squat. YouTube's full of videos that teach you how to do a modified squat. When it comes to something artistic for a hobby, that could be anything. For some people, it's gardening. It could be drawing, needlepoint, crochet, painting, sculpture. You don't have to be good at these things. In fact, you have to look at this as a fun obstacle you're willing to learn more about. So I started recently taking up charcoal drawing. I was always a pencil and ink guy for years. So for me to learn charcoal, it's different because charcoal's more like painting than it is drawing. So it's interesting for me because I'm learning a different medium. Now I have to admit I enjoy it, but it's different. So you can't expect to start at the top with a new hobby. The whole point of learning this new hobby or getting back to one of your old hobbies is to actually get good at it again or get good at it for the first time. You don't have to start making money off your hobby. So who are you trying to impress? You're trying to impress yourself. You want to get better and better, and you're not going to get better after each individual session of, say, practicing drawing, but you should notice a difference after a few months. And then a few months after that, you should notice a dramatic difference from there. So say you just want to focus on something simple like eyes. I wanted to learn to draw an eye. Go to a YouTube video, learn to draw an eye, and learn to draw that eye 100 different times, and you'll find you'll get better and faster at it, and then you're going to be good at drawing an eye. Then you could draw 2 eyes, and then you could focus on drawing the nose, and then you could focus on drawing the mouth, and then you could focus on drawing the whole head. You don't have to master it right away. And the other thing is something that's mentally stimulating. So I recommend something like a puzzle. I don't recommend movies, TV shows, video games, or books because I know this might not be popular. Those are sort of mind numbing. You sort of let your mind go when you do those things, but that's a different thing because that's almost like a trickle charge. You're zoning out when you're doing those things. You're not really mentally stimulating yourself. I recommend something that is constructive. So puzzles are a good way to go. Now think about that. You can do all sorts of puzzles online. You can look at sports as something that's mentally stimulating. You can combine something physical and something mentally stimulating because think of checkers, think of board games. You're still mentally engaged in what you're doing. And it's a hobby when time goes by and it feels like it's been 20 minutes, but it's actually been more like 2 hours. So what this all comes down to is you have to start looking at food as your fuel. You can't find ways to give yourself permission to cheat or treat yourself. You want to balance your hobbies with the stress that you had. If you had a mentally stressful day, you want to balance that with a physically challenging hobby. If you had a day that was very physical, you want to give yourself time with a hobby that's mentally stimulating. So photography is something that for me is mentally stimulating and artistically stimulating. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for tuning in. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I hope this is something you find helpful. And please let me know in the comments if there's other emotional triggers that you find you can add to this list. Anyway, I want you to take care and have fun. Thanks for tuning in.